Have you ever caught yourself sitting in a quiet room, maybe sipping your morning coffee, wondering when exactly your own child stopped seeing you as a parent and started seeing you as something else? Something to control, to blame, to use? It's a strange and painful shift. And if you're watching this, chances are you felt it too. Maybe more than once. You worked hard. You gave what you could: time, love, guidance, money, maybe even parts of your soul. And yet, somehow, here you are in your 60s or 70s, feeling like something got lost along the way. Maybe you've noticed your confidence fading, your joy shrinking, your trust eroding. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to wonder, how did things that once felt so normal, so human, become so hard? Today, we're going to talk about 5 very real, very personal things your narcissistic adult children may have ruined for you as you've grown older. This isn't about blaming or finger-pointing, it's about healing. It's about finally naming the quiet pain you've carried and gently starting to loosen its grip. Because the truth is, you're not alone and you're not broken. You're just trying to find your way back to yourself. Let's begin with something that cuts right to the heart of it: your sense of self. When you raise a child, you expect that one day they'll grow up, find their own way, and maybe even come back around to see you not just as mom or dad, but as a person, someone with value, someone with wisdom, someone worthy of love and respect. But narcissistic children rarely allow that to happen. Instead of seeing you as a whole human being, they tend to keep you boxed into roles that serve their own needs. Maybe you were the fixer, the emotional punching bag, the wallet, the one who could be counted on until you said no. And when you finally did set a boundary or tried to speak up for yourself, suddenly you were selfish or toxic or crazy. Over time, all of that chips away at something sacred: your identity. You start questioning yourself more than you used to. You wonder, am I really that bad of a parent? Was I too much? Was I never enough? You may catch yourself second-guessing your own memories, rewriting your own story to fit someone else's narrative. That's not you losing your mind. That's what long-term emotional manipulation does. It confuses your inner compass until you can't tell which way is up. But here's what I want you to hear loud and clear. The version of you that existed before the guilt, before the criticism, before the silent treatment or the gaslighting, that person is still in there. You are still in there. Your story didn't end when your kids started rewriting it. You still have the pen. And you can still reclaim the truth about who you are. That starts with self-trust. Small things at first, like honoring your preferences again, what you enjoy, what you value, how you like to spend your day. You don't have to live your life performing for someone else's approval anymore, especially not when that approval is conditional, manipulative, or cruel. You've earned your freedom. Now it's time to live like it. And that brings us to something else narcissistic children often damage, sometimes without even realizing it: your understanding of love. As parents, we tend to think love is unconditional. We love our children before they even speak a word. Through scraped knees and heartbreak and school plays and graduations, we love. It's instinctive. So when that love starts to feel one-sided, it's confusing and heartbreaking. With narcissistic kids, love often becomes transactional. They might show up when they need something: a ride, a loan, a babysitter. But when you need them, when you're in the hospital, or grieving a loss, or just feeling lonely on a Sunday afternoon, they're too busy, too distant, or worse, they make you feel like a burden. Love turns into something you have to earn, over and over again. And no matter how hard you try, it never seems to be enough. The calls you make go unanswered. The kindness you show gets met with silence or sarcasm. And eventually, your heart starts to close in on itself. You stop reaching out. You stop hoping. If that sounds familiar, please know you didn't fail at love. You were loving someone who didn't know how to receive love in a healthy way, and that is not your fault. But you can still experience love, true love, in this season of life. It might not come from the people you expected. It might come from a friend, a neighbor, a pet, a support group, or even strangers online who have walked a similar path. Don't shut out the possibility of connection just because your child forgot how to connect. And more importantly, don't forget how to connect with yourself. Love yourself the way you wished they would have. Talk gently to yourself. Make your meals with care. Walk in the sunshine. Write down the good things you still carry. Because when you love yourself, truly love yourself, you start to rewire your heart. You start to feel worthy again, and that changes everything. Now let's talk about something many people overlook: how your joy in simple things, like hobbies, learning, or even just relaxing, can get damaged by narcissistic children over time. You may have had dreams or passions once: gardening, painting, dancing, reading in peace. Maybe you enjoyed traveling or trying new things, or taking classes just for the fun of it. But somewhere along the line, those things became harder. Maybe your energy got drained dealing with all the drama. Or your confidence took such a hit that you stopped trying new things because it felt safer to stay small. And if you ever did try to do something for yourself, go on a trip, take a class, say no to a request, you might have gotten guilt-tripped or criticized. They may have called you selfish, ungrateful, not acting your age. And so slowly, day by day, your life got smaller. Not because you wanted it to, but because shrinking felt safer than being seen and judged by someone who once called you their child. But here's the truth. Joy is not selfish. Joy is not immature. Joy is not inappropriate. Joy is medicine. And it's never too late to rediscover it. I've seen people in their 60s take up watercolor painting for the first time. I've seen 70-year-olds learn how to ride a bike again. I've seen grandmothers start book clubs, and widowers join photography groups, and retired couples travel the country in RVs. I've seen people who once thought their best days were behind them realize, sometimes in an instant, that they still had so much living left to do. You do too. Your life doesn't end when someone else decides to stop valuing it. And it sure doesn't end when your own child forgets the love you poured into them. You have value, you have wisdom, you have a future worth living, and it starts with one small, brave step toward reclaiming your joy. Maybe that step is turning off your phone for the afternoon and walking through a quiet park. Maybe it's making yourself your favorite childhood meal. Maybe it's calling that friend you've been meaning to catch up with but always talked yourself out of. Whatever it is, do it for you. Because you matter. Your happiness matters. And yes, it might be hard at first. It might feel strange to prioritize yourself after so many years of putting everyone else first, but it gets easier. And the more you practice joy, the more natural it feels, like breathing, like coming home to yourself. Let that be your new normal, not the silence, not the guilt, not the shrinking. Let joy, self-love, and confidence be the way you move forward from here. Sometimes the things we stop doing aren't even big, bold dreams. Sometimes they're small, simple things, like trusting other people, or even trusting ourselves. And that brings us to something else narcissistic children often leave behind in their wake: your ability to feel safe, exploring the world. When we were younger, we all had moments of wonder, curiosity about people, places, or new experiences. Maybe you remember what it felt like to try something for the first time, riding a bike, baking a new recipe, speaking in front of a group, or just visiting a place you'd never been before. Back then, mistakes were part of the learning process. You got to fall, try again, laugh at yourself. But when your child turns the tables on you, criticizing your decisions, making you feel incapable, or treating your efforts with sarcasm or disdain. You begin to doubt your own instincts. You become overly cautious. You feel afraid to make the wrong move, even in your own life. It might show up in small ways, like hesitating before offering an opinion, or avoiding a conversation because you're sure it'll be twisted. Or worse, feeling like you need to ask permission to live your life. Because somehow, somewhere along the way, your own child made you feel like they know better than you do. You might start to hear that inner voice say, "What if I get it wrong? What if they judge me? What if they stop talking to me again?" And just like that, your world begins to shrink. That shrinking doesn't always come from fear alone. It often comes from experience. You might have had times where you spoke your truth and your child punished you for it. Or maybe they hung up the phone. Maybe they stopped bringing the grandkids around. Maybe they posted something online or told family members a twisted version of events. Those things don't just sting. They train you to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay safe. But the problem is, safety without freedom isn't safety. It's a cage. You deserve better than that. One of the most powerful things you can do, even now, even after all this time, is start taking tiny steps back into the world. Not the world your child controls, but the one that's still open to you. The one where you get to decide where to go, what to try, who to trust. That might mean signing up for a community event, even if you don't know anyone yet. It might mean trying something new, not to be good at it, but just to experience it. It might mean finally booking that trip you've been dreaming of, or just walking a different route at the park one morning. Each of those small acts is a way of reminding yourself, I am not trapped, I am not broken, I am not done. You are still capable of learning, growing, and finding joy in new places. You are still allowed to live your life on your own terms. And if someone in your life, child or not, makes you feel like you're too old, too naive, or too embarrassing to do something new, that says more about them than it does about you. People who love you cheer for your curiosity. They don't mock it. They don't punish it. They don't fear it. Now let's talk about something that often goes unspoken, but deeply affects many parents, especially those raised in strict or emotionally repressed homes. How your relationship with your body and your own sexuality may have been twisted or shamed. Not just by your upbringing, but even later, by your children. It's a heavy topic, but it's important. When you were growing up, maybe no one talked about intimacy. Maybe they made it sound dirty or shameful. Maybe it was used as a weapon, or worse, involved trauma that never got spoken aloud. So you did what many of us do. You stayed quiet, pushed those feelings down, and tried to move forward. But then years passed. You raised a family. You did your best. And now maybe you're older, single, divorced, or widowed. Maybe you've discovered that you still have needs, desires. Maybe you want to feel wanted, touched, seen. And maybe, the moment you started to express that in any way, through dating, companionship, or even just dressing, in a way that made you feel confident, your child looked at you with disgust, or judgment, or control. Mom, why are you wearing that? Dad, don't tell me you're dating again. You should just focus on the grandkids. Isn't that kind of gross at your age? And just like that, a very human, very healthy part of you gets shamed right back into hiding. Let me tell you something that needs to be said more often. Your age does not erase your humanity. You are still a person. You are still allowed to want love, closeness, attraction, intimacy. There's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is when someone, especially someone you once held in your arms, makes you feel like your needs don't matter just because you're older now. The truth is, many adult children struggle with seeing their parents as whole people, especially when they themselves are narcissistic, emotionally immature, or stuck in black and white thinking. They want you frozen in a certain role, the caretaker, the background character, the one who never changes. So when you start to show up in your own life, it threatens that narrative. It reminds them you're not just mom or dad, you're a real person with real wants. And for someone who sees the world only through their own lens, that can feel intolerable. But here's what matters. This is your life, your body, your chapter. And if there's something in you that still wants connection, whether emotional, physical, or both, you're allowed to explore that. You're allowed to feel good in your own skin. You're allowed to laugh, to flirt, to experience desire without apology. And no, it's not too late. It's never too late to feel alive. Healing your relationship with your body, your desires, and even your sense of touch can be part of reclaiming your freedom after years, maybe decades, of walking on eggshells. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about finally giving yourself permission to be whole. There's a kind of beauty in that wholeness, a quiet strength that comes from surviving what you've survived and still choosing to love yourself. It might start small. Maybe you try wearing something that makes you feel good, not for anyone else, but just for you. Maybe you have a conversation with someone about companionship, even if it's a little awkward. Maybe you allow yourself to imagine being close to someone again, not as a fantasy, but as a possibility. These steps may feel scary, especially if your child has tried to shame you out of them. But they are steps toward reclaiming what's yours. Your dignity, your agency, your right to live, not just exist. I know these topics aren't easy, but they are real, and they matter because you matter. If your narcissistic child made you feel like you don't deserve love, don't deserve joy, don't deserve trust, don't deserve to be seen, I want you to remember this. They don't get the final say. You do. You get to rewrite the story of your later years. You get to decide what's normal for you now, not what they decided was acceptable. Because what they call normal might be nothing more than control wearing a mask. You've lived too much life, survived too many storms, and carried too much weight to shrink yourself now. The world didn't stop being beautiful just because someone else stopped seeing it. And you didn't stop being worthy just because someone forgot how to love you well. You are still here, you are still learning, and you are still allowed to reach for something more. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing the things you once considered normal, the things that made up the rhythm of your life, have quietly disappeared. And not because of age or illness or even time, but because of someone you love, someone who should have made your life fuller, not smaller. Maybe you were once proud of how you handled challenges. You worked hard, you showed up, you carried the weight when no one else would. But now, years later, you find yourself second-guessing even the smallest decisions. Not because you don't know what you're doing, but because every time you try to act like the capable, grounded adult you are, your child makes you feel like you're not. And that leads us to one of the most painful things narcissistic children can take from you: your confidence. Confidence isn't about ego or pride. It's about feeling steady in yourself, trusting your judgment, knowing that your experience matters. But when you've been told, either directly or subtly, that you're too emotional, too dramatic, too sensitive, too old-fashioned, or too behind the times, you start to pull back. You hesitate before speaking. You keep your thoughts to yourself, not because you don't have wisdom to share, but because it's been dismissed too many times. You start to believe that maybe your voice doesn't carry weight anymore, that maybe you've become irrelevant, invisible. And the most heartbreaking part? That loss of confidence didn't come from strangers. It came from the very people you raised to believe in themselves. That's the cruel irony. of narcissistic parenting dynamics. You poured into them, your time, your values, your lessons, only to be told later that you somehow don't measure up, that your way isn't good enough, that your feelings are too much, that you're the one who needs to get help. But let me say this as gently and clearly as I can. Their projections are not your truth. You are not too much. You are not too emotional. You are not broken. You are a person who has weathered storms they can't even imagine. You've lived through grief, through sacrifice, through reinvention. You've seen the world change again and again, and you've kept going. You've adapted. You've endured. That is not weakness. That is strength. Rebuilding confidence after years of being minimized takes time. It's not a switch you flip. It's more like a muscle you start using again. And the more you use it, the more it returns. Start with small acts of self-trust. Speak up in a conversation, even if your voice shakes. Make a decision without running it past anyone else first. Wear the thing you love. Share your opinion. Remind yourself that you have a lifetime of experience, and that matters. It still matters. And if someone in your life rolls their eyes, mocks you, or tries to tear you down for asserting yourself, that's not your cue to shrink. That's your cue to stand taller, to protect your peace, to remember that their comfort with your silence does not outweigh your right to speak. You do not have to justify your existence to anyone, and you especially don't have to beg for respect from the people who should offer it freely. Confidence isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it's simply the quiet knowing, I am enough, as I am, right now. And that brings us to something else that may have quietly slipped away over the years, especially if you've been walking this path alone, your sense of joy in simply being yourself. Think back, if you can, to a time before all of this, before the manipulation, before the walking on eggshells, before the confusion and the gaslighting and the guilt. Who were you? What made you laugh? What lit you up inside? What made you feel alive? That person isn't gone. They're just buried under layers of exhaustion, sadness, and maybe even shame. But they're still there, and they want out. One of the greatest acts of rebellion against narcissistic control is to reclaim your joy. Not just in the big, dramatic ways, but in the everyday moments that make life feel like yours again. Joy is the book you read just because it makes you smile. The song you sing in the kitchen, the friend you call and laugh with until your cheeks hurt, the walk you take without your phone, the outfit you wear because it makes you feel bold. Joy doesn't ask for permission. It simply waits for you to notice it again. And here's the thing, you deserve to notice it. Even if your child made you feel like your joy was embarrassing, or inconvenient, or foolish, especially then. Because you know better now. You know that joy is not a luxury, it's a lifeline. Especially as we get older. There's something sacred about choosing joy in your later years. Something powerful about deciding that no one, no matter how close they are to you, gets to steal your light. Your kids may have tried, maybe they still are, but you're not powerless, not anymore. And if you're still here, watching this, listening, taking it in, that means there's still something inside you that refuses to be erased. Something that wants to live fully, honestly, freely. Let that part of you lead the way now. You've spent enough time being defined by someone else's wounds. You've spent enough time apologizing for your needs, your memories, your boundaries, your heart. You are not a mistake. You are not the villain in their story. You are a survivor, a seeker, a soul still unfolding. And yes, healing from narcissistic parenting, even as the parent, can feel like an uphill climb. But every step you take toward reclaiming your life is worth it. It's worth the discomfort. It's worth the grief. It's worth the tears. Because on the other side of all that, there's peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from finally being okay with who you are. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this entire video, it's this. It's never too late to come home to yourself. You are allowed to love yourself deeply, to enjoy your own company, to celebrate what you've survived, to dream new dreams, even now. And no matter what anyone, child or otherwise, has told you, you are still worthy of a good life. A life that feels spacious, a life that feels true, a life where you get to breathe again. So start there, with one breath, one decision, one brave, quiet act of self-love. You don't have to fix everything overnight. You don't have to explain your healing to anyone. You just have to take the next step. Because this is your life, and you deserve to live it. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this spoke to something inside you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Your story matters, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. It really helps us reach more people who are navigating similar pain. And don't forget to subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more content that uplifts, supports, and honors your journey. You're not alone in this. Here's to healing. Here's to reclaiming. Here's to living your best life at any age.